Hi, welcome back to Via Hafta TV. My name is Avrum Rosensweig. I'm the president of Via Hafta. We're very delighted to have with us today Mark Fox. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you.
The show today is most interesting because Mark is a Via Hafta, part of the Via Hafta family, and not so long ago he went out on the streets of Toronto for a 36-hour period.
Yes.
And essentially, he was homeless for that period of time. Now, most of us are blessed to be surrounded by four walls, to have our 3 meals a day, and not to have a good understanding of what it means to be a homeless person. And we're most excited to have this opportunity to speak to you about that today. So thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts, as they say, I'd like to sort of capture your background a little bit, because not everybody that we asked, as you can imagine, or when we offered the opportunity to people to go on the street, did they come forward and say, yeah, that would be a great idea, but you did. And let's figure out why. So you were born in Toronto.
Correct.
Close to 60 years ago.
1952, the old Mount Sinai Hospital.
The old Mount Sinai Hospital. It's where my son was born. And you were telling me that your parents were involved in community when you were young in Tikkun Olam, which is repairing the world. How was your father involved?
My father was the breadwinner for the family. His involvement was primarily through B'nai B'rith,
Yes.
I think Blue Star Lodge, but it was really my mother that was the one who demonstrated Tikkun Olam in a larger sense. She was a stay-at-home mom, but she raised funds for the Heart Foundation. She was involved in Hadassah, in B'nai B'rith, was president of her chapter to B'nai B'rith, involved with a lot of fundraising with those organizations. But she also spent 30 years at Mount Sinai in the auxiliary and participated in the board of Mount Sinai and raised funds for them also, in addition to her auxiliary work. So her participation in fundraising, charities, et cetera, was always constant throughout my growing up.
So do you remember aspects of what she did for the auxiliary?
My mother was in the thank you card part of the organization. I think she headed that up from the volunteer side at one time. She was the one who would send out, if you phoned up and said, I want to make a donation in this person's name, she sent that card out to you thanking you for that donation. And of course started her own little fund at the hospital in my parents' name. So that was her. Would she
schlep you along when you were little to the hospital? Was that part of your growing up years? Did you know the place?
I wouldn't say no. I wouldn't say she schlepped me along there, but it was certainly the case that I was brought down there. I was introduced to everybody, and wherever I went in the hospital, and my mother certainly spent a fair amount of time in the hospital. Wherever I went, people knew who my mother was, and they always had a smile on their face, because my mother is a very happy person.
Is she still with us, your mother?
Yes, she is.
What is her name?
Her name is Ida.
Her name's Ida. Is your father still with us?
No.
When did he pass away?
1992.
And how old was he when he died?
70.
70 years old.
Yeah.
Did your father consciously sit down with you and teach you about chesed, about kindness, about giving, about sharing? Was that part and parcel of your upbringing?
My father, I don't think, would ever sit down and verbalize what it meant to be a good person. Everything he taught me was by action. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget, and this isn't a charitable example, but I'll never forget when I was 16, I'd taken his car out for a drive, and I was in an accident, minor accident, dented the car. I came home, came running into the house, and my dad was sitting there in front of the TV. And I started to say, Dad, I was in a car accident. And he looks at me and he says, you okay?
Yeah. I
said, yeah, I'm fine. He said, okay. And I said, don't you want to look at the car? No, not important.
Very good. Was that the type of man he was in general?
That's the type of person he was.
Very good. Now, it's interesting. Later on in life, you became a professor in the University of Toronto in industrial engineering, right? So I love that field. I find it fascinating.
You're one of the few people who know what it is.
Let me describe it and tell me if I'm right, okay? You'll go into, let's say, a manufacturing environment, of which we have very few in Canada anymore, and you'll say that this machine is a little bit too far away from this machine, and these people should stand a little bit closer in order to be as efficient as possible in the manufacturing, the development of that particular product. Is that pretty close?
An industrial engineer will go into any organization, whether it be manufacturing, a hospital, a bank, Canadian Tire, Loblaws, et cetera, and we will look at how they operate and make recommendations on how to increase the efficiency of their operations. And a lot of it has not to do with getting people to work harder. It has to do with getting people to work smarter.
Right,
and that's really what our focus is.
So what would be one or two memories that you have, really fascinating opportunities in your field, that you've succeeded at?
Oh, where have I succeeded? Well, in the early part of my career, my research focus was in the area of scheduling, scheduling the factory, or scheduling aircraft operations, anything that has to do with the allocation of resources over time. And I came up with a set of techniques that over a period of 5-10 years began to permeate all the software products that were being made in industry in the 80s and 90s. And so part of my research has found its way all around the world, and has found its way in scheduling things all around the world. And I did receive, I was elected a fellow of the Association for Artificial Intelligence,
very good.
Based on that work.
Very good. We were speaking to Mark Fox, and Mark recently went out into the streets of Toronto to, I guess, hobnob with Toronto's homeless and to determine exactly what it is like to be homeless for a 36-hour period. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk more about that. I think we'll actually go into the streets of Toronto, at least metaphorically speaking, and see what your experience was like. So please stay with us. You're watching Via Hafta TV, and we're taking you into the world of empathy with Mark Fox. Welcome back to Via Hafta TV, taking you into the world of empathy. Once again, we're with Mark Fox for the show. Thank you again for joining us. About 3 years ago, I actually went into the streets of Toronto myself for a couple of days. We called it 3 days on the street. And I really wanted to have the chance to spend some time with the individuals whom we call clients. Now, I learned a few things out there, one of which is I was definitely not homeless, that's for sure. I also learned that one can survive on the street, but it's very difficult. And of course, from all my experiences in the streets of Toronto, I think I developed my empathy more so for those individuals who may be construed as being the most vulnerable amongst us. So this past summer, once again, you spent 36 hours on the street. Let's walk through that. What time of day did you start out?
Started out at 7 a.m. Near College and Spadina, and
which is deep in downtown Toronto.
Deep in downtown.
This place
correct.
in the States, the show too.
Okay. To give a feel for the area just down the street, or just at College and Spadina, there is a mission called the Scott Mission.
Yes.
A large number of people who are homeless or impoverished. One of the things I think we forget when we focus on the homeless is that not everybody out there is homeless, but they are certainly under the poverty line and are unable to pay for food. Yes. As simple as that. And so the people that I was interacting with, some are homeless, most of them are impoverished. But it's the center of the city. It's the center of where people who are homeless or impoverished are located. There's a number of missions in that area, and so we started off by going first to a mission that was open at 7 a.m., where we could get coffee and toast and cereal to start the day.
What did you have in your pockets before you went out?
I had zero money. I had my health card in case something would happen to me physically, so at least they'd recognize me at the hospital. And I had my cell phone to record where we were, what we were doing. So a number of the pictures that one sees behind us, were taken using the camera. But other than that, we had nothing.
And we should add, by the way, that you went out with a friend, Jen, who is I think the catcher for Canada's women's softball team.
Team Canada.
Team Canada. Were you afraid before you went out?
No, I wasn't afraid. I'm either too stupid to be afraid, or I don't know what. I wasn't afraid, but I was a bit apprehensive.
Well, how did that play out?
Well, I mean, play out in terms of what happened on the street, or my apprehension.
How did your family and friends feel about it?
Oh, everybody thought I was absolutely crazy.
What did they tell you?
They told me not to do it.
Yeah. What was your response?
I'm doing it. Simple as that.
And why did you want to do it?
You know, I live in downtown Toronto. Unlike most people in Toronto who live in the suburbs or away from the core, I see the homeless, I see the impoverished day in and day out. Yes. Every time I walk by the Scott Mission, people are lined up there. So living in the midst of the homeless and the impoverished is something that I'm very, very familiar with. And so one could say that I have a feel for what it is. But when I look at myself, the reality is I truly don't understand what it means to be impoverished or homeless. And I really wanted to get a better feel for it. I want to get a better understanding of what these people who I see every single day, day in and day out, are going through.
You know what I find interesting about that? I deal with many people, volunteers, donors, homeless themselves, impoverished, and so on. And the vast majority of people who I deal with on the volunteer side, let's say, they don't have an interest in getting that close. You do, or you did. I'm curious what it is about you that actually compelled you to go out there and spend time with individuals living on the street versus those who would say, no, I don't need to do that. I don't want to do that. I'm not interested in it.
I don't know if I have an answer for that question. I can say that when I went out on the van, the Vahafta van for the first time,
yes.
I truly enjoyed meeting the people who are out there.
Right,
that it wasn't for me, my role there wasn't just simply to hand out coffee and bagels and things like that. My role ultimately was to talk to the people that were out there, to communicate with them, to carry on a conversation. I'm not saying that what I was really trying to do was to get to know them. Perhaps it was for them to get to know me.
Right.
And in hindsight, that turns out to be very important, because one of the things I learned when I was on the street was how isolated people are out there, how they live in silence mostly out there, that a cone of silence envelops them, and they spend their days and nights not communicating. And so in hindsight, in some sense, I was providing an opportunity for them to communicate with me, as opposed to me communicating with them.
Would you qualify yourself as a caregiver?
Never.
Would you call yourself as a loving, empathetic person?
I think my kids think I'm loving. As to whether the world around me thinks I'm a loving, empathetic person, I doubt that.
You have students at the University of Toronto, obviously.
Yes.
Do you operate in a similar sort of sphere? In other words, do you offer your students the opportunity to come to your office and spend time with you? Is your door open to others?
My door is open, but I don't think people would characterize me as that open person. I know other faculty members who are truly open, and people gravitate towards. Whereas I don't view myself that way. But most people view me as a little harder to get to know, because I have a more formal demeanor about me. And that formality about me, I think, makes it difficult for others to...
So did you surprise yourself that you went out? Did you surprise others? I know they were upset. They said, don't do it, Mark, but you did it. Did you surprise yourself and others?
I don't know about the others, but I didn't surprise myself.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt comfortable doing what I was doing. That doesn't mean to say that what I was doing was easy.
Yes.
It was not easy.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second. You're watching Via Hafta TV. If you'd like to know more about Via Hafta, please go to our website at www.viahafta.org. Mark was mentioning the van that Via Hofta sends out into the streets of Toronto. Indeed, we do. 5 shifts a week. If you'd like to be part of that, please give us a call at 416-964-7698. We'll be back in a moment to continue our discussion with Mark Fox, who is taking us into the world of empathy. We're back with Mark Fox, taking us into the world of empathy. So you went out into the streets of Toronto at 7 a.m. You popped over to a shelter, had some breakfast. How was the breakfast?
Not something I can normally eat for breakfast. There are certain things I can eat in the morning, certain things I can't. But I got a cup of coffee, and it was just very simple stuff in the morning. But it was an eye opener in terms of what the services are that are provided, because at that particular shelter, mission, St. Stephen's on Augusta in the heart of Kensington Market, they have showers, they have laundry facilities, and so I was starting to learn what type of services were available. And this was truly early on in my whole 36 hours. I was still fresh. I hadn't walked a great deal. It was a beautiful sunny morning, and it was just sort of like, okay.
Yeah, great.
I got a cup of coffee for the morning.
Let's
Jen
go
got
for a
some
stroll.
Jen got some cereal. After that, let's go for a stroll.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. We walked around for a little bit, visited Al Waxman at the park down the street, went down to the Grange Park near the Art Gallery of Ontario, and it was just a beautiful day, and we were just out walking. And so the first 3 hours were nice. It was a nice experience. And our goal was to then go to the Scott Mission for a real breakfast. And it turns out Scott Mission at 10:30 in the morning serves a meal. What we didn't know at that time was that this was truly the main meal of the day that they were serving.
Yes.
And they did an amazing job. There was meat and potatoes and soup and bread and dessert and everything. And I was just amazed at how well you can eat in this city. When I left there, I was just, and there was no attempt to impose religion or anything on people there. People who were quiet, they lined up, everything was orderly, they got fed. And it was an amazing way to really start the day at 10:30, 11 o'clock with a very full and satisfying meal.
How were the people in the line?
Everybody was quiet. Yeah, what was interesting is there's very little interaction. I found this everywhere we went when we went for food, is that the people who lined up tend to keep to themselves.
Yes.
Nobody was talking to, very few people were talking to each other. There wasn't a sharing of anything when you were in line. And even when you sat down at a table and there were 6 people at a table, people were focused on being quiet, being in line, eating, and then leaving.
So you were quiet as well?
And we were quiet as well. And I really didn't want to start inserting myself in any way. I didn't want to start asking people questions because I thought it was inappropriate. What was I going to say? Having a great day? How'd you end up here at Scott Mission or something like that? I really couldn't think of something I would ask that I thought would not be intrusive. And we found that's the way everybody acted. You know, they left each other alone. It was very quiet.
Did you feel like the other at that point?
No, I didn't know what feeling like being impoverished or homeless was yet. It really took the second day on the street to truly get, I can't say truly get the feeling, but to get a better feeling of what it meant. Because by the second day, we were exhausted. We got 2 hours sleep the night before.
Where did you sleep?
Slept for an hour at City Hall.
City Hall, right.
And quite frankly, I've become an expert on park benches as to what types of benches are good to sleep on, what are not good to sleep on. Slept for an hour there and then moved over to University Avenue and slept in the Meridian. and was able to get another hour's sleep, but then it suddenly turned cold. And I couldn't sleep. I didn't have any clothing that would keep me warm. And so I had to spend the rest of the time walking around until we could get some food someplace. And the lasting impression that I got out of the experience was pure exhaustion. And now when I look at people who are homeless or walking the streets, I ask myself, how can they maintain that? Because after just 24 hours, I was absolutely exhausted.
You were, eh?
And then on top of that, the isolation was noticeable. That, you know, if you're panhandling, you know, people walk by you. Most people walk by you, they don't give you any money. But others who do give you money, most of them, if they give you money, just keep walking. There's no eye contact, no communication whatsoever. And so this whole notion of the cone of silence, the isolation, the silence around you, really became apparent. And so if I come away with two things that really, really made an impression upon me, it was exhaustion and isolation.
Did you watch people watching you? Were you aware of yourself and how you fit in or did not fit in amongst those people walking to work or leading what we would call a normal life?
Well, it's certainly the case that I could see myself walking by all the time. And especially when we started panhandling in the financial district, I saw myself everywhere. And I saw myself walking by. And I even saw one gentleman come by. And I swear he looked somewhat like me, but he was dressed, you know, in a suit. He walked by, and they stopped. And he came back and put $20 in my hat.
Did he?
Yeah, and he then kept on going, didn't communicate or anything like that. And I had to ask myself, you know, did something good happen at work and he wants to give back, or did he see a little of himself in me?
I'm going to guess.
I don't know.
I'm going to guess. We're talking to Mark Fox, who just recently spent 36 hours on the streets of Toronto through Via Havta. The goal, I guess the mission was to empathize with those people living on or near the street. We're going to go to a break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about panhandling, because I've done some myself. I've also counseled some homeless people on how to panhandle well, because not everybody does. So please stay with us. We're taking you into the world of empathy with Mark Fox. Welcome back to Via Havta Television. We're speaking with Mark Fox, who recently went out into the streets of Toronto. Just a little bit of context here. It's very difficult to say how many homeless there are in Toronto. Some people say 5,000, maybe 1,000 people who are living on or near the streets on any given night, or actually on the streets in the shelter system or in the ravines of Toronto. Via Havta was established 16 years ago, and our mission statement is to encourage all Jews and all peoples to play a role in Tikkun Olam, which is repairing the world. Since our inception, we've had vans that have gone out into the street taking volunteers to assist by giving out food and drinks, hot or cold, appropriate to the seasons, as well as glasses, books, clothing, and so on. You actually went out on our van some time ago. You were compelled to do so after coming to our Starry Nights gala, and we're certainly happy that you did. This past summer, you were on the streets for 36 hours with Jen Gilroy, and Jen is here, and as we said before, she's the catcher for the women's Canada softball team. So she's an interesting woman.
Yes.
How was it being with her?
Oh, it was great. I mean, we got along great.
Did you?
Yeah, I mean, she's laid back, I'm laid back. You know, we just, there was no friction or antagonism or battle of wills or anything of that nature. So we just sort of rolled with everything.
But by the time you were finished on the street, did you have a strong sort of relationship? Was there a camaraderie between the two of you? As one would come, you know, at the end of camp, you finish camp or you watch your kids come home from camp and they're so in love with, you know, with their fellow campers. Did that happen on the street between the two of you?
Well, I think I think we developed an appreciation for each other. You have to remember that Jen is, I think, around 21,
Yes.
and I'm 60.
Yes.
So it's not like we're going to be fellow campers.
Yeah, right,
with the age difference. But I think it surprised both of us how well we got along, and literally we did everything together for 36 hours.
Right.
And so, I mean, I walked away happy with the experience, happy with getting to know Jen.
Were you hardy out there? Were you? I know you were tired. I know you felt isolated. Were you physically okay? Were you solid?
I was exhausted.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is that if you look at, as I said earlier, my initial impressions were that there's food out there. There's a lot of food out there. Whether it's the Scott Mission, their major meal at 10:30, or it's Lawyers Feed the Hungry, where they do dinners and breakfasts, which are also very good. If you know where to go, you're not going to go hungry. But that isn't the issue. The issue is the exhaustion. And so if you want to go get a shower or laundry your clothes or get a meal, you're walking around all day long. And that's what really began to do me in, is the walking with the heat. It was very hot out, and we're walking from place to place. Well, I remember we walked to St. Christopher House to take a shower one morning, discovered it was closed. We didn't know what the hours of operation were. So all the missions have different times at which they're operating, when they feed, when they provide food, when you can get a shower or do your laundry, etc. And so I felt like a ping pong ball. I was just going back and forth to these places, and I'm walking around. Now, I thought to myself, yeah, it's really hot. I'm really worn out by the heat. What happens if it was, freezing outside, if there's snow on the ground, walking from place to place? I wouldn't be able to do that. So here it was summertime, and I'm exhausted. And then when you don't sleep at night, how more amplified that exhaustion is. It was tough. Did I feel hardy? I didn't feel hardy. No. By the second day, I was exhausted, and we had to find places where we could actually take a nap. And I remember on the first day, we went down to the waterfront, and there's a park there. We lay down. I started to get my first bit of sleep. I must have been asleep for 15 minutes, and then woke up because I was being bitten by flies and red ants. And so even just trying to lie down and take a nap in a park was difficult to do because, I don't know, the insects were out to get us. I
was talking before about individuals who I sort of helped panhandle in the street. I'll often see someone in particular that I'm thinking about who hides in the shadows as they're asking for money. And I've actually physically gone up to him and said, listen, you're scaring people, because nobody wants to give to a shadow. They want to see your face. They want to know who they're giving to. Obviously, you have to elicit empathy. What was it like to panhandle, to ask other people for money?
I wasn't very good.
Yeah. You're not a good panhandler.
I'm not a good panhandler.
Yeah.
I quite frankly felt embarrassed.
You were embarrassed.
Yeah, I was embarrassed by panhandling. And didn't stop me from doing it. But I wasn't the outgoing panhandler in a sense that I would, speak out and say, hey, can you lend me a few dollars? Jen was a lot better and was a lot more successful than I was in panhandling. Matter of fact, when we panhandled on Queen Street, I got zero. Okay, I was just a total failure. I would sit there, there'd be a sign, I have my hat, and I just sort of wait for people to provide some type of money, and that didn't work. Whereas Jen was a little more forceful and stood there with her hat out, and people gave her money. But when we switched over to Young and Richmond, I was the more successful one.
Why is that?
I think people saw themselves in me. Okay, I don't know what it was, but I got a lot more money that way, and I didn't change in the sense of how I did things. I stood there, had the sign, had my hat.
So how much money would you have taken in?
Let's see, not much at all. I think in total between the two of us, we may have gotten about $40.
$40.
Like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was it. And so I then turned around and donated that back to Vahafta as
Thank
part
you.
of this whole
The
thing.
receipt is forthcoming.
Already came. But yeah, we didn't really make a lot, and it was very interesting because I think we were taking someone else's spot on the street, and that other person who panhandles was very upset with us.
Oh, were they?
Yeah, and began to follow us around and berate us for
How so?
taking her.
Like saying what?
You took my spot. That was my money. Things of that nature.
What was your response?
Didn't say a word. I learned a long time ago not to respond.
Not to engage.
Yeah.
We're talking to Mark Fox, who was recently on the streets of Toronto through Via Hafta. When we come back from the break, I'd like to delve into perhaps a relationship that you established on the streets, or some camaraderie or conversations that you may have had with the homeless. I know that when I was on the streets, I'm a communicative sort of fellow, and I do ask questions, and I make sure maybe I'm a little bit nosy when it comes to why people are out there and what their lives are all about. So I'd like to discuss that for a few minutes, and just generally what your feelings were, with having all this exhaustion and just being tired all the time, and knowing that you're not going to sleep very much for that period of time. What did you take away from that, and what have you shared with others? So stay with us. We're with Mark Fox, who is taking us into the world of empathy. You know, Mark, I remember when I was on the streets of Toronto. My first day started out in a shelter downtown, and I was sitting on the sidewalk next to a fellow, and he told me that he had been in and out of jail. He had come from out east, many kids in his family, somewhat of an abusive environment, and how he came to Toronto, and for years, decades, 3 decades I think it was, had lived off the system. And it's certainly not easy to be part of the system. I've gleaned that from the many individuals that I've worked with. You yourself have struck up a couple of, I guess, what we might consider to be rich conversations with individuals on the streets. Tell us about one or two of them.
I think the conversation that stands out in my mind is the one we had with a man, originally I believe from Saskatchewan, of Indian First Nations background. And his story was unsettling. He was one of the children who was picked up by I think it was Edmonton police, when they were drunk, driven out of town, and dropped off in the middle of nowhere in the middle of winter when it was freezing, without shoes, without a coat, with the expectation by the police that he would die out there. And this was a story that was covered by the newspapers a number of years ago. And he was one of those people, and he's alive today simply because a elderly husband and wife were driving home back to their farm, I believe, that same time, saw him and stopped and picked him up. And took him home, fed him, clothed him, and survived that experience. And it was shocking to actually see this face to face. Shocking in the sense that we live in a society where police would do something like that. And this gentleman had moved back, not moved back, but had moved to Toronto and was on welfare, but trying hard to create a life for himself. And that discussion with him also opened my eyes in some areas, that if you're on welfare, you're not getting very much money. You don't have enough money to pay for a room and to eat. And so that's why I talk about the impoverished as opposed to the homeless. Because in the welfare system, there is enough money to pay for a room, whether it's $400, $500 a month. But you don't have enough money to eat, let alone to do anything else. And so the question then becomes, if you're living on welfare and you do want to pull yourself out of the situation you're in, how do you do that?
Yeah.
This person wants to go to college and learn a certain skill. How do you pay for that? Mm-hmm. How do you even figure out how to go to the college and apply for something? I mean, skills that we have based on our background are totally alien to a lot of other people. And so they are barred from entrance because A, they don't have the money, and B, they may not even be able to get over there from a transit perspective, but C, they don't understand how that system works.
Yes.
And so there are a huge number of barriers to take yourself above that poverty line, welfare system. And that was an eye-opener for me in many ways.
Is there anybody else that you would like to tell us about, stories of conversations you had?
Nothing else comes to my mind. I think the general story that was made a huge impression upon me is, again, that this isn't an issue just about the homeless. This is an issue about the impoverished. Mm-hmm. That I saw lots of people in the lineups for food who actually shower, their hair is washed, they do shave, their clothing is relatively clean because of all the services that are out there, but still aren't able to feed themselves on their own, still aren't able to move up the ladder very easily. And that's what we ran into all the time.
Did people ask you who you were?
No. People never asked us anything.
Were you surprised?
Yes. But after a while, I was no longer surprised because the level of conversation that existed, that one would assume would be there, wasn't there.
Yes.
That when you're sitting at a table having lunch or dinner or whatever was breakfast, very little conversation, and no conversation of substance.
Were you ever frightened?
No, I was never in a situation that was frightening. The people that we interacted with, whether it was sleeping at Nathan Phillips Square at City Hall or elsewhere, were actually very helpful. Mm-hmm. We ran into a couple, a guy and a girl. The girl was 16. The guy's probably about 18, 20. He's been living on the street for 3 years. She's been living on it for about 4 months. You know, like you say, getting into their story, I was very hesitant, and I had a long conversation with those two. Hesitant to get into the story, why at age 16 is she on the street? He refuses to sleep in shelters. Mm-hmm. I found out in conversation that the shelters can be violent.
Yes.
The shelters there's a lot of theft in the shelters. And these people, some of the people who are on the street prefer not to deal with that level of abuse that the shelters may contain.
We're about to wrap up this segment and go into our final segment. And when we do, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what you took away from this experience, who you shared it with, and if there have been any changes in your life vis-a-vis yourself, or perhaps those people living on or near the street, or the impoverished, as you say, if you've adjusted because of this education. So please stay with us as Mark Fox takes us into the world of empathy. Welcome back to Via Hafta TV. One of the programs that Via Hafta launched 2 years ago now is called our Street Academy, the Via Hafta Street Academy. Are you familiar with it?
Yes.
So it's in concert with George Brown College, which is obviously a college here in Toronto. And essentially twice a year we have 8-week semesters, at which time we invite homeless individuals to come out and be part of a school. And it's really quite dynamic because we pay people to learn. We give them lunch every single day. We have a Metro Pass that we give them for the entire 8 weeks so that they can travel. As you were alluding to before, it's very difficult if you're homeless to have funds or what have you to be able to travel. The Via Street Academy is magnificent, Mark. It really is. And we have found, we're watching the measurables, and we've discovered that indeed it's helping people who live on the street or near the street. One fellow, Mike, just graduated with a certificate from George Brown College, so he can now legally work in the construction industry. And he called me up the other day. He's somebody who has multiple personalities. He doesn't describe it as such, but and he said to me, Avrum, I'd like to go on tour. I'd like to talk. I'd like to be motivational. And I thought, wow, how wonderful that is. It's hard to be on the street because you get tired, right? Mm-hmm. And you feel alone. Mm-hmm. And you told me something during the break, which I need to share with our viewers, that had you been out on the street perhaps for another day, you might have started talking to yourself, right?
Certainly the case.
What did you mean by that?
As I said, I was exhausted.
Yeah.
And even though I was with Jennifer, and I had there was people from Bahafta somewhere nearby in case there was a problem. Just sitting there panhandling and being by yourself, not communicating with anybody. It was very easy for me to just go over that edge of starting to talk to myself because nobody else would talk to me. And this loneliness of just moving. You're moving through society. You're always walking. You're always moving, always heading from one mission to another, or panhandling, or trying to find a place to sleep. And you don't have that level of conversation that we as individuals in the workplace have every single day. One of the things that we take for granted is when we go to work, we're conversing with people. We're interacting. And we're social animals, and we need we need a certain level of interaction to be normal. And when you lose that, to me, I could become very unnormal very quickly. And the thought of talking to myself was something that was very real to me.
Have you felt that before, a sense of isolation?
Not like that, no.
Not that intense?
The only time I've had that intense feeling was when I traveled to some other city by myself and had to live by myself and not knowing anybody for 2-3 days. I felt that level of isolation, but I didn't have that exhaustion. I didn't have that being ignored per se. So I didn't have all the other pieces that being on the street bring to bear and really, really affect the way you are.
You now know something that most people don't know. What have you done with your education?
Well, I can certainly say that I believe being on the van, on Vahafta's van, is very important to me.
Yes.
And that I need to be on that van more often in order to communicate with people that are out there, because I think communication is very important. I also believe that the program that you run in terms of transitioning people off the street and into the working world is extremely important. And so there's also a question of what role I can play with regards to that. But I also look at how I respond from let's say a professorial perspective, which is, what's the best use of my time? Mm-hmm. What is it that I can bring to the table that would really have an impact? And it dawned on me after that experience that there are a large number of services out there, a large number of people, organizations who are doing wonderful things for the impoverished and the homeless, including the government. But it's not clear to me that anybody has done a broad analysis of the services in defining what the program of services we should provide that will take somebody from the street and return them to the working world. The Vahafta School is very important. All the food programs are very important. The programs for getting identification, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're all there. All the pieces are there. But I don't know if anybody has done a full analysis of the entire, from beginning to end process to say, here's how all these pieces should fit together. And from my background, which is industrial engineering, which is looking at processes and optimizing and designing processes, that's a skill I can bring to the table to try and fit all these pieces together in a better way that will maximize the use of the significant resources we currently apply to the problem.
We have to wrap up. I want to tell you that I enjoyed this interview very much.
Thank you.
I really did. I think it's almost like the definitive educational piece when it comes to homelessness and how we who live in homes respond to it. I'm still very intrigued by your response because it's very unique. It's very unique. You're very thoughtful about it. You know, you went out into the streets. There was some sacrifice on your part. It wasn't simple, but you did it. And now you're even more intrigued by the whole experience and what you can do from here on in. So thank you very much for sharing your feelings and your thoughts with us and for being part of the Via Hafta program. It's a very big deal to us, and we're deeply, deeply grateful, and we are to Jen as well. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the show as well. If you'd like to get more information about Via Hafta, you can do so by going to our website at viahafta.org. That's VEAHAVTA, or you're welcome to call us at 416-964-7698. Once again, we'd like to thank Mark Fox for being with us and sharing his experiences and taking us into the world of empathy on Via Hafta television.